In the late afternoon, at a modern cafe in the heart of Seoul, the public's attention was subtly drawn to the presence of Suga from BTS, who arrived in a simple yet striking appearance, wearing a plain black t-shirt paired with dark casual pants and a mask covering part of his face, a style he often chooses to maintain comfort in public spaces. The cafe itself was not overly crowded, though popular among young people and office workers for its relaxed atmosphere, wooden interiors, and warm, dim lighting that created a calm setting. Upon entering, Suga walked with a composed demeanor, greeted kindly by the staff who seemed familiar with him as a regular customer, before being directed to a corner table slightly apart from the bustle. Soon after he sat down, several others joined him, their attire neat yet casual, some carrying laptops and thin documents, indicating this was not a grand formal meeting, but rather a light professional discussion. As one person opened a laptop and began sharing points while another placed papers on the table, Suga listened attentively, his posture relaxed and his expression calm as he occasionally nodded to show he was engaged. The scene reflected a balance between seriousness and ease, with Suga appearing fully present without any sign of tension. Around them, the cafe maintained its usual rhythm, with patrons engaged in conversations or focused on their laptops, seemingly unfazed by the quiet presence of a global star among them. From a journalistic perspective, the moment revealed an understated side of Suga, someone who naturally blended into ordinary surroundings without attracting unnecessary spectacle. He had arrived without noticeable security detail, accompanied only by a single management staff member seated slightly behind him, ensuring things remained secure while not intruding on the relaxed atmosphere. Throughout the meeting, the exchange flowed like a casual dialogue rather than a rigid business session, with Suga sipping occasionally from his drink, maintaining a steady and approachable aura. Every so often he allowed a small smile as he listened, further softening the impression of the gathering. The simplicity of the situation highlighted the contrast between his international fame and his preference for grounded daily routines, where even professional matters could be addressed in the familiarity of a neighborhood cafe instead of a formal office. Captured discreetly by a camera, the images of him sitting at a wooden table, holding a warm beverage, and engaging in discussion while surrounded by ordinary patrons painted a picture of authenticity, reminding observers that celebrity life still contains pockets of normalcy. For Suga, this setting served not only as a space for casual work, but also as an environment where he could maintain balance between the demands of his career and the comfort of simplicity. As the afternoon gradually shifted further toward evening, the tone of the meeting remained calm, steady, and unforced, leaving the impression of a natural scene in which one of the world's most recognized artists navigated his responsibilities with quiet humility and ease. At the same cafe in Seoul as the afternoon deepened into early evening, the rhythm of the gathering involving Suga continued to unfold with the same understated pace. The black t-shirt he wore blending effortlessly into the relaxed atmosphere, while his companions maintained their focus on the materials they had brought with them, laptops positioned neatly and documents occasionally being referred to as points of conversation moved along in an even flow that felt more like thoughtful exchange than rigid business. Suga maintained his calm demeanor, leaning slightly forward at times to look more closely at the screen when a chart or note was shown to him, and then returning to his relaxed posture with a gentle nod as if affirming his understanding. The background of the cafe remained steady, with the faint hum of espresso machines and soft music accompanying the conversations of other visitors who were largely unaware of the significance of the quiet figure in the corner. Observers could note the way Suga's approach to the meeting emphasized attentiveness rather than dominance, a characteristic that often defines the impression he leaves in professional settings, choosing to listen more than to speak and responding only when clarity was needed. The people around him seemed comfortable in his presence, interacting without hesitation, treating him as both collaborator and equal, which underscored the professional respect that likely guided their relationship. The choice of a public yet unpretentious location for such a meeting illustrated a kind of balance, creating a neutral ground where discussion could unfold naturally without the weight of overly formal arrangements. The subtle interactions, like Suga reaching for his drink between exchanges or briefly adjusting the sleeve of his shirt, carried a sense of normalcy that contrasted with the image of him on global stages where every gesture is magnified. Within that cafe space, he was simply a man participating in an everyday activity, with his status known only to those who cared to notice. The meeting itself extended into a rhythm that was neither rushed nor prolonged unnecessarily, allowing for ideas to be addressed with clarity before moving onward. And at times, the group would pause collectively as someone took a moment to type notes on their device or organize papers that had been spread out. In those pauses, Suga seemed at ease, taking in the surrounding calm with the same quiet observation he brought to the discussion. The gradual shift of light outside the cafe windows, signaling the approach of evening, created a backdrop that matched the tone of the gathering, steady, unhurried, and grounded in everyday reality. For onlookers, the scene reaffirmed how Suga continues to navigate his professional world without requiring grand displays, relying instead on a grounded manner that blends the extraordinary scale of his career with the modest spaces of ordinary life. When the group eventually leaned back slightly from their documents and screens, the atmosphere suggested that the essential points had been covered for the day, leaving only the natural ease of companions sharing a closing stretch of time before parting. As evening settled more firmly over Seoul, the cafe lights took on a warmer tone, and the meeting that included Suga carried forward with a gentle sense of winding down, the black t-shirt he wore still marking his simple presence amid the subdued energy of the place, while the others at the table began to close laptops and stack documents that had been spread across the wooden surface earlier, signaling that the main purpose of the gathering had been addressed. Suga remained seated with a calm expression, his posture relaxed as he sipped the last of his drink, occasionally exchanging brief gestures with those beside him, showing acknowledgement without needing to speak much, a rhythm that reflected his reputation for quiet attentiveness. Around them, the cafe grew busier, with new arrivals seeking evening coffee or light meals. Yet the group in the corner maintained a kind of bubble of calm, immersed in their own conclusion of the day's agenda. Observers would notice the subtle way Suga carried himself in such an environment, never drawing unnecessary attention, yet naturally standing out simply by being present, his demeanor modest and his interactions marked by courtesy. The companions with him, likely collaborators or colleagues, packed their belongings with care, some checking their phones for messages, while others adjusted their bags before preparing to leave. And through it all, Suga stayed unhurried, as though deliberately allowing the others to finish first before making his own move. The choice of timing added to the realism of the scene, for it was a weekday evening and the energy of the city outside was beginning to shift from daytime busyness to nighttime leisure. While inside the cafe, the lighting, the aroma of coffee, and the murmurs of conversation created a familiar backdrop for a moment of transition. For Suga, the setting seemed to provide a measure of comfort, a neutral ground between his professional obligations and his personal preference for environments that are ordinary and unpretentious. His ability to exist seamlessly in such spaces was part of what made the site notable, as it contrasted with the scale of his public persona on stage and in the media. As the group finally rose from their seats, chairs moving quietly across the floor, there was no rush or spectacle, simply a group of people leaving a cafe after finishing a meeting. Yet within that simplicity lay a reflection of how even figures of global recognition often navigate their commitments in ways that mirror everyday life. Suga adjusted the strap of his bag, nodded politely to the staff as he passed, and walked toward the exit with the same calm pace he had carried throughout his time inside. The staff members responded with professional warmth, their expressions showing respect without intrusion, while the other patrons largely continued with their own evenings, some noticing him briefly but quickly returning to their conversations or screens. The moments encapsulated a balance between the ordinary and the extraordinary, a quiet intersection where the life of a world-renowned artist overlapped with the unremarkable flow of a Seoul cafe on an evening like any other. And in that intersection, what emerged most strongly was a sense of grounded reality, a reminder that the scale of fame does not erase the simplicity of human routine. Stepping out from the cafe into the evening streets of Seoul, Suga continued the flow of his day with the same understated composure he had shown inside, the black t-shirt and casual attire blending easily with the ordinary atmosphere of people moving through the city after work. Some hurrying toward bus stops and subway entrances, while others lingered in small groups outside restaurants and shops, creating a familiar weekday rhythm. His companions walked alongside him for a short distance, their conversation quiet and focused, reflecting the natural continuation of what had been discussed earlier, yet without the intensity that had marked the meeting itself, more like colleagues reviewing loose ends before going their separate ways. Suga listened as they spoke, occasionally offering a brief response, but much of his demeanor remained reflective, his gaze shifting between the people around him and the subtle glow of streetlights beginning to color the evening. From a journalistic perspective, what stood out in this moment was not spectacle, but the ordinariness of it. A high-profile artist leaving a modest cafe with a small group of colleagues and blending into the city as if he were simply another resident, unaccompanied by flashing cameras or dramatic attention. Passers-by occasionally glanced, recognizing him, but largely respecting the unspoken boundary that allowed him to walk without disruption, an unremarkable yet meaningful testament to the way fame and privacy can sometimes coexist. The group eventually paused at a corner where some hailed a taxi while others adjusted their paths toward nearby streets, each person naturally dispersing as their evening routines called them elsewhere. Suga, after offering a courteous gesture to those parting, continued with one staff member, his steps steady and unhurried, embodying a rhythm of life that favored balance rather than haste. The city around him carried its own soundtrack of traffic, voices, and distant music from storefronts, underscoring how his presence merged into the larger current of everyday urban life. For those who had observed him through the afternoon and evening, the significance lay not in any dramatic occurrence, but in the quiet authenticity of the sequence. An internationally renowned artist spending time in a neighborhood cafe, engaging in professional discussion with composure, leaving without commotion, and moving through the city with humility intact. It painted a picture of Suga not as an untouchable figure confined to stages and headlines, but as a working individual navigating commitments in grounded spaces that ordinary people share. The evening closed on that note, unforced and unembellished, reinforcing the impression that behind the scale of global recognition, there exists a man who values simplicity, respects the flow of ordinary environments, and chooses to conduct parts of his life in settings that mirror the calm steadiness he often projects. Suga's evening continued past the cafe as he walked further into the city with a staff member. The black t-shirt he had worn throughout the day now softened under the dim glow of Seoul's streetlights, giving the impression of someone comfortably transitioning from a professional task into a quieter personal rhythm. The streets were active but not overwhelming, filled with people heading to casual dinners, small stores, or simply strolling as part of their nightly routine. And within that flow, Suga moved naturally, neither seeking attention nor avoiding it, just present in the same way as anyone else navigating the evening. His staff member occasionally checked a phone, perhaps coordinating small details of schedule or transportation, while Suga kept a calm pace, hands lightly in his pockets, eyes observing the surroundings with a thoughtful stillness. The contrast between his global stature and this ordinary scene was striking, yet deeply human, because it highlighted that even someone of his influence still inhabits the same spaces of city life, waiting at crossings, adjusting to the rhythm of pedestrian traffic, acknowledging the hum of cars and the chatter of people passing by. A taxi slowed nearby, briefly catching his attention, but he chose to continue walking, suggesting that the moment was more about unwinding than rushing home. From a journalistic point of view, the detail worth noting was how seamlessly Suga adapted to environments that were not curated or staged, but entirely ordinary, reflecting his consistent tendency to seek balance between public recognition and private normalcy. The walk itself carried no sense of spectacle, yet it conveyed more than enough about his character, patient, reflective, and grounded. Along the way, a few pedestrians recognized him, offering quick glances that lingered for only a second before they returned to their own paths, an unspoken agreement of respect that allowed him to remain undisturbed. Such moments reinforce the quiet social contract that often exists in Korean urban spaces, where celebrities can sometimes move freely when they choose simplicity over display. The air carried a faint chill, typical of late evenings in the city, and Suga adjusted slightly, pulling his sleeves and tucking his shoulders with the same casual movements familiar to anyone on a night walk. Eventually, his path curved toward a quieter street where smaller shops were closing and fewer people lingered, creating an even calmer environment that seemed fitting after a day of steady activity. There, his pace remained steady and relaxed, and the evening's impression solidified. Suga's life, despite its global demands, still unfolds in spaces that mirror the lives of countless others, shaped not by constant spectacle, but by grounded moments of routine.